Good afternoon, students. Today we will discuss the lesson The Great Derangement, written by Amitav Ghosh. Amitav Ghosh is one of the India's greatest writers. Amitav Ghosh, in his book The Great Derangement, argues that future generations may well think, are we deranged? How else can we explain our imaginative failure in the face of global warming? Ghosh examines our inability at the level of literature, history, and politics to grasp the scale and violence of climate change. Here is a very short extract from the book to introduce the students to allow Amitav Ghosh and his concern for culture and environment. In this extract, Ghosh throws light on the nature of climate change and its relationship to culture. In his seminal essay, The Climate Change of History, Deepesh Chakrabarti observes that historians will have to revise many of their fundamental assumptions and procedures in this era of human induced climate change. Humans have become geological agents, changing the most basic physical process of the earth. I would go further and add that the Anthropocene presents a challenge not only to the arts and humanities but also to our common sense, understandings, and beyond that to contemporary culture in general. There can be no doubt, of course, that this challenge arises in parts from the complexities of the technical language that serves as our primary window on climate change. But neither can there be any doubt that the challenge derives also from the practices and assumptions that guide the arts and humanities. To identify how this happens is, I think, a task of the utmost urgency. It may well be the key to understanding why contemporary culture finds it so hard to deal with climate change. Indeed, this perhaps the most important question ever to confront culture in the broadest sense. For let us make no mistake, the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture and thus of imagination. Culture generates desire for vehicles and appliances for certain kinds of gardens and dwellings that are among the principal drivers of carbon economy. A speedy convertible excites us neither because of any love for metal and chrome, nor because of any love for metal and chrome, nor because of an abstract understanding of its engineering. It excites us because it evokes an image of a road arrowing through a pristine landscape. We think of freedom and the wind in our hair. We envision James Dean and Peter Fonda racing towards the horizon. We think also of Jack Kerouac and Vladimir Nabokov. When we see an advertisement that links a picture of a tropical island to the word paradise, the longings that are kindled in us have a chain of transmission that stretches back to Daniel Defoe and Jean Jacques Rousseau. The flight that will transport us to the island is merely an ember in that fire. When we see a garden lawn that has been watered with desalinated water in Abu Dhabi or Southern California or some other environment where people had once been content to spend their water thriftily in nurturing a single vine or shrub, we are looking at an expression of a yearning that may have been midwifed by the novels of Jane Austen. The artifacts and commodities that are conjured up by these desires are, in a sense at once, expressions and concealments of the cultural matrix that brought them into the being. This culture, of course, intimately linked with the wider histories of imperialism and capitalism that have shaped the world. But to know this is still to know very little about the specific ways in which the matrix interacts with different modes of cultural activity, that is poetry, art, architecture, theatre, prose, and fiction, and so on. Throughout history, these branches of culture have responded to war, ecological calamity. Why then should climate change prove so peculiar resistant to their practices? From this perspective, the question that confronts writers and artists today are not just those of the politics of the carbon economy. Many of them have to do also with our own practices and the ways in which they make us complicit in the concealments of the broader culture. For instance, if contemporary trends in architecture, even in this period of accelerating carbon emission, favor shiny glass and metal plate towers, do we not have to ask what are the patterns of desires that are fed by these gestures? If I, as a novelist, choose to use brand names as elements in the depiction of character, do I not need to ask myself about the degree to which this makes me complicit in the manipulations of the marketplace? In the same spirit, I think it also needs to be asked what is about climate change that the mention of it should lead to banishment from the preserves of serious fiction. And what does this tell us about culture with large and its patterns of evasion? It is substantially a altered world we live in. When sea levels rise has swallowed the Sundarbans and made cities like Kolkata, New York, and Bangkok uninhabitable. When readers and museum goers turn to the art and literature of our time, will they not look first and most urgently for traces and portents of the altered world of their inheritance? And when they fail to find them, what can they do other than to conclude that ours was a time when most forms of art and literature were drawn into the modes of concealment that prevented people from recognizing the realities of their plight? Quite possibly, then this era, which so congratulates itself on its self awareness, will come to be known as the time of great derangement. Thank you, students. Again, after some time, I'll be sending you the lesson in the PDF format. Go through the lesson and as well as questions and copy them in your assignment book.